So hello and welcome. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sara Gutterman. I'm the CEO of Green Builder Media, and we are so happy to have you here today with us to talk with our friend and climate anxiety expert, Kate, who we'll get to in just a second. But let me just set up some context for today's conversation. I think that we all know you're here today because you know that climate change has a powerful impact on our psychology, and years of intensifying superstorms and wildfires and extreme temperatures have spurred an increasing level of eco-anxiety, particularly in younger generations. And so much so that an emerging medical field of eco-psychology, which studies the psychological impact of climate change, has been growing. And we're really watching that field and seeing a lot of mental health professionals become experts in that area. And the discipline is expanding substantially. And we're really excited to help do everything that we can to facilitate that conversation about mental health and climate. Because, as I mentioned, that climate anxiety is particularly intense among millennials and Gen Zs. And in fact, Green Builder Media's Market Intelligence Division, COGNITION Smart Data, shows that about 87% of these younger individuals report that they're worried about climate change, and 56% believe that humanity is doomed because of climate change. That's not 6% or 16%. 56% is substantial. And again, a lot of these younger generations, through our Cognition Smart Data, tell us that they have a high level of guilt and shame about their own impact on the environment. 61% report that they feel guilty about their own negative impact on the environment, and 45% feel shame. 75% of these younger individuals report feelings of sadness, anger, powerlessness, and helplessness when it comes to mitigating the impact of climate change. And over half feel ignored when they try to express their climate anxiety. And they're largely pissed off at older generations for ignoring climate science. So that's why we think that today's conversation with Kate Schapira is so important. And again, we really welcome you here. Kate has been listening to people about climate change for about a decade at the Climate Anxiety Counseling booth and elsewhere. She lives in Providence, Rhode Island, where she teaches nonfiction writing at Brown University and is involved with local efforts towards environmental justice, climate justice, and peer mental health support. The exercises in her first work of nonfiction, Lessons from the Climate Anxiety Counseling Booth, offer actionable steps for connecting with others, identifying and activating community abundance, matching skills with organized climate activism, and imagining a radically more livable future in order to bring it into being. So with that, Kate, I'm going to kick it over to you. And again, thank you so much for being here. And I, for one, am really interested in hearing what you have to say today.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Victoria. And thank you, everybody, for sharing part of your day with me and with each other. Yes, absolutely. I will put not only the title, but a link to where you can buy the book. In the meantime, as I'm saying a little bit more about my work, what I've done, and what I have to share with you today, if you would be willing to put in the chat your name and a climate change impact where you're living or one that matters to you. And I can model that. So my name's Kate. I live in Providence, RI, Narragansett Land. And we're really feeling the impacts of sea level rise where we're living. And I hate sea level rise. So you can do that if you wish, just to let folks know, obviously your names we can see, but a little bit about what's on your mind. And part of the reason that I'm inviting you to do that is when I started listening to people at the Climate Anxiety Counseling booth a number of years ago, actually it is 10 years ago this year, May 2014 was when I started. I was feeling extremely alone and isolated in the way the impact that climate change was having on the land where I live, the air, the water, but also how I felt about it. I would try to talk with people about how severe the impacts were, how frightened I was, how angry I was, and just those conversations kept getting stuck. And when I built my little booth, which looks like the little booth that Lucy has in Peanuts, if people remember that comic strip, it says climate anxiety counseling, 5 cents. The doctor is in. It's made out of cardboard. I set it up in the big bus station downtown in Providence where everybody comes and changes buses. And I just wanted a framework for talking with people about this. I wanted to see, was I really alone? Was I nuts? Was my response too extreme? Were other people not bothered by this? Or if they weren't bothered about it, what were they worried about? What was stressing people out? What was consuming people's minds and emotions in the way that my kind of recognition of climate change, ecological destruction, and then later also climate injustice, that was having this effect on me. I'm seeing impact on temperature and rising waters, urban heat island impacts. Yes, don't love those either. We have those in Providence also, especially on the south side, where a lot of people who are poor, lower income, people of color, disabled people, elders are living. Toxins leaking into the James River, seeing a lot of wildfires and wildfire smoke, also sea level rise, hard summers, losing winter, loss of snowpack, excess rainwater and humidity. So grateful for all of you for sharing these. I hope that just even seeing these, I'm seeing a bunch of them double up, and I'm hoping that just even seeing these is doing for you what the climate anxiety counseling started to do for me, which is reminding me that I was not alone, that we are not alone, that we are facing these impacts together, we are experiencing them together, even though the impacts may be more severe for some of us. Some of us may have fewer resources to deal with them than others, and that we will address that as we have this conversation. But that this is a shared experience. This is a shared human experience, and talking about it when something is real, talking about it is never the problem. So I appreciate you sharing. I'm seeing waste management, impact of climate change on wildlife. Again, so grateful to you for sharing these experiences. So climate anxiety as a phenomenon has, as Sara said, been getting a little bit more attention lately. And I use that term, so just full disclosure, I'm not a psychologist. I don't have a PsyD. I don't even have a PhD. I started doing this based on my own emotions, and then very quickly found out, as I said, that it was a shared experience that I wanted to listen to people more and more about. But it has gotten a lot more attention, I think, in the news lately. And the way that I use the term climate anxiety is, it's any strong, fearful emotion that you have about what climate change has done, is doing, and or will do in the world. That could be, I survived a terrible storm and I'm afraid of the next storm. It could be, I don't know what my kids' future or my grandkids' future is going to look like, and I'm worried about that. Or I'm trying to get my mind around the possibility of a future at all. It could be anything in between that. So I think sometimes there's a focus in these discussions on people who are afraid of losing what they haven't lost yet. And that may apply to you. It's also equally true to describe climate anxiety as the feeling that you have of losing even more than you've already lost, or what those impacts are going to mean for your present and future. Does anybody have like questions about what climate anxiety even is? You could raise a hand or you could put them in the chat. Any questions about what it is or how you've heard people talk about it? We can also ask those at the end if you would like. So if you don't want to ask them now, hang on to them. You will have room for all questions later. So no, go ahead.
I do have a quick question. So in your experience, do most people like express it in like nervousness, or do you see anger or almost depression? Like, is there a range of emotions, or is it more just one?
There's a range, and thanks for bringing that up too, Victoria, because I feel like I sort of locked myself in when I started this by accident by describing it as climate anxiety. I don't think that's even really accurate to the situation. Absolutely anger, I hear despair, I hear loneliness, I hear grief, I hear frustration, I hear a kind of like a deadness in the heart from some people. They don't exactly, and also I hear people who don't really put it in terms of emotions at all. They say I'm overwhelmed or I'm stressed or even just I'm tired by living in this time. I'm overwhelmed, I'm stressed, I'm tired. Life is hard. Sometimes people will say things like it is what it is, which is like a huge like flag for me. I'm like, okay, let's talk about that a little bit more. Why is it that way? Do you feel like this is the only way that it could be? And trying to kind of open a box that is closed, if people are ready to open that conversation with me. So yes, absolutely, there's a range. Sometimes people will say things like what people have said in the chat here, right? They won't say I'm anxious. They'll say I can't stand this heat, or they'll say the Rhode Island recycled metals plant caught fire again and poured out toxic smoke into the air that my kids breathe at the playground, which is a thing that happened about a week ago. Truly wild. That we could talk about that too a little bit later. But one of the things that I feel like I hear in terms of a future fear is people sort of saying like, well, how are we going to make room for everybody? Like, what if people move? What if they come here? Or how are we going to feed everybody? Or how can we possibly take care of everybody? How are we going to take care of everybody? What are we going to do? How are we going to, in this way that sort of implies to me, at least the way that they're asking the question, that they think there isn't a way, that they think there is no way to take care of everybody. They think there is no way to house everybody. They think there is no way to feed everybody. And so the implication is things are going to get violent, things are going to get scary. And I hear this kind of, you might think I'd be hearing this mainly from people, again, who are afraid of have a lot and are afraid of losing what they have. But I actually kind of hear this across the board from people, which surprises me. But there we are. And so one of the things that I evolved for the book is this exercise, which I call turning it around. What we're turning around is that question. The question of how are we going to find housing for everybody who needs housing, right? Make it a real question. How are we? How are we going to do that? Climate anxiety is a community problem. Its solutions are community solutions. How are we going to find housing for everybody who needs housing? Put it in the chat. What are we going to do? Treat it as a real question. Imagine that somebody had asked you that question in bad faith, and you're going to spit it back to them in good faith. How are we going to do this? Relax zoning ordinances. Yes, thank you. Working on that in Providence right now. Long-term rentals instead of Airbnbs. We love to see it. Thank you, by the way, Honolulu. Adaptive reuse. Dara, I know what that is. Other people probably know what it is, but just in case, throw a little bit of explanation in the chat for us. Retrofitting existing commercial and office spaces into affordable housing. Love that. That could work with the zoning ordinances as kind of a 1-2 punch. Beautiful. Other things that people can think of. How are we going to house everybody? How are we going to do it? Because we're going to have to do it. How are we going to do it? Again, for folks that just came in. So again, this idea of abandoned buildings that aren't being used, converting those into usable spaces, shelters, and longer-term housing, tiny house communities. Yes, although in areas where wind is a problem, those can have concerns of their own. Other ways that we are going to be responsible for one another. A couple other ideas. These are all great. Prefab and modular, 3D printing, higher performance, more cost-effective housing, multi-general family arrangements. Mwah! I love you for saying that. Yes, absolutely. And there's actually an exercise in my book to have the conversation with people about if they need to come and stay with you, either temporarily or permanently, after a disaster, or if you need to go and stay with them. There's a template for having that conversation together. Oh, yes, thank you, Mary. Absolutely. Hold on, putting the link in the chat. Momentarily. More collective living and communal living. Yes, housing co-ops, where they're possible, are also a great way for people to share space in an equitable way so that everybody has a right to the space. Nobody's there on sufferance. Name of the book and a link to the book is now in the chat. Thanks for pointing that out. So it sounds like a lot of possible solutions are represented here, right? Of course, we know that it's easy to have ideas. Sometimes it's a little harder to get ideas to happen, but also sometimes it's hard to even have ideas. And we're going to do an exercise a little bit later on to kind of build our imagination out even further and more beautifully. But we can draw on the chat for some of those ideas here in the how of that. So another quick question, and you don't have to answer this because it is a question about how you feel and you don't know each other like that. But how did it feel? Think about it, just notice it, how you're feeling after having been asked and answered that question. Just check in with yourself momentarily. Is it exciting? Is it dismaying? The moment that you said, oh, we could do this, did you find another part of your brain going, oh, but like my city would never go for that? Or like, oh, we tried that and like it was so frustrating and it didn't work. So just noticing your own reactions to this. And the reason why I'm bringing that forward is whether we know it or not, how we feel affects how we connect and what we do. That actually became a premise of the counseling booth from the very beginning, that it is worth it to pay attention to how we're feeling about things, not to try to change them, not to try to alter them. Often our feelings are absolutely real, valid, appropriate responses to what we see going on in the world around us. They're not something that we need to try to make go away. And if you do try to make them go away, it usually doesn't work very well. But knowing how you're feeling can help you understand, okay, what is that feeling asking me to do? And that's another reason why it's worth it to share both the impacts that we care about and how we feel about them with other people. Having those climate conversations, which you don't have to call them that, is stressful for some. I think it depends on your community, but even then, I feel like they may surprise you. And the practice of doing so allows what I said before about climate anxiety being a community question with community answers. It allows that to come to the front, because if you're able to say to someone, hey, I'm really worried about what's going to happen if the fires come to where we're living and we have no place to go. There is raising the point of frustration, right? So that's another thing that might happen. You might say to someone that you know, I can see how we could fix this. I can see how we could help each other. And I feel like the people who can make decisions that would capacitate that are not listening to me, and it's making me so frustrated. Anxiety mixed with hope and energy, absolutely. Sometimes you can use that anxiety as a kind of like boomerang to spin yourself off the wall, to kind of like parkour off the wall and leap into action. I respect it. I don't always have the ability to do it, but I honor it. And then almost a corresponding or complementary approach, finding that thinking about specific possibilities feels calming. That, I think, is another reason why it's worth having these conversations together, both as a group here and then in the communities, maybe especially then in the communities where we live. Because climate change is so big. It affects everything, as we saw someone mentioned before. And everything kind of affects it, but not always in the ways that we would like. Sara mentioned guilt a little earlier, and I hear that from a ton of people, right? Feeling a lot of guilt, a lot of shame about the ways that they cannot help but contribute to climate impacts. And partly that's the fault of British Petroleum and their made-up idea of the carbon footprint. You could spend all day being mad about that if you wanted to. I often do. But it's also, I think, kind of worth, again, checking in, saying, okay, yes, I feel guilty. Yes, it's frustrating. I am in a trap. It feels like I can't help through my job, through my household, but contribute to the systems that are hurting me. How could I maybe nourish the systems that would not hurt me? How could I nourish the living world? How could I nourish good housing policy? How could I vote for people, addressing Mary's point? How could I vote for people, look into candidates who have very solid climate policy, also very solid housing policy, also very solid healthcare policy? All of these issues, also very solid education policy. All of these issues interact with climate change because climate change affects everything. It is that interconnectedness is a bug and it's a feature. Pretty much anything that you do to help people survive this time, to create greater equity and justice, to get people where they need to go based on what they tell you, is going to reduce the strain that climate change and its impacts put on your community or communities. Any ease that you can introduce, any safety that you can introduce, any confidence that you can introduce, any lines of communication that you can open, any sense of fairness that you can increase. All of these things, even though they don't necessarily lower emissions directly, they can have a positive impact. Not necessarily on emissions, although sometimes you can do something to change systems, but on our ability to weather this time that is upon us with care, with justice. Hold on, I'm checking my notes. All right, so we're gonna do another little exercise together, and we're gonna use breakout rooms. This is an exercise that's from the last chapter in the book, which deals a lot more with imagination. And so we're going to maybe build out some of the points that you all raised in the chat about different ways to create livability in the place where you are. What you're going to do is we're going to place you in some breakout rooms together, 2 or 3 people. And you're going to, I'll put this in the chat as well. You're going to imagine a day, livability, well-being in the place where you live are complete. I sometimes call this the livable city, but of course not all of us live in cities. Some of us live in small towns, suburbs, out in the country. So it's where you live, and living there is healthy and easy and free for the people who live there. What is everyone? How are they moving about? Or are they resting? What are they doing for one another? So once you enter your breakout rooms, I want you to imagine this together. And what I want you to also do is if somebody sort of leaves something out, and I have an example that I'll share in a second, bring it up as an addition, not like a correction. So I'm thinking about I think a vision that a lot of people maybe have embraced who live in cities is the idea of a car-free city, which sounds great and is great in some ways, but is tough for people who need a car to get around because of the abilities of their body. And so what you might do is say, okay, it's car free except for emergency vehicles, power chairs, adaptive tricycles, other wheeled ways for people to get around that are motorized, but don't necessarily pollute or cause congestion or injure people in the way that cars often do. Does that make sense? Does anybody have questions about what I'm asking you to envision together? And you may want to take some notes while you talk, because I am going to ask a few people if they feel like sharing toward the end. Who's got questions? And the description of the prompt is in the chat. Questions? All right, so I think we're going to take about 10 minutes to scheme on this, and then we will be back. Dream big.
Hey, is it okay if I make you host so you can do the breakout rooms?
Of course,
Yes.
absolutely.
So make host. And let me know if that works. If not, we might have to stay together as a whole group, which I know isn't exactly what we want to do, but I'm not seeing the button.
That's
Sorry
okay.
for the technical difficulties, everyone.
There's not a million of us. It's okay, we can do it together. I also am not seeing the button.
Okay, is that okay if we stay together?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
All right, so because there aren't a million of us, I think we can go ahead and do this out loud and maybe hear each other's voices a little bit. A day in the livable city. What are we doing? What happens?
Personally, I would like there to be like a self-sustaining food source. So all of the food comes locally from our city. That might not work for cities as much, but maybe small towns. I'm in a small town, and I would like to see more food independence.
To build off of that, you know the little mini library systems? I don't know if y'all have them where you are. Okay. I was in the countryside yesterday, and there are the farm stands on the side of the road that you leave the money and you take what you need. And I was just thinking how nice it would be to have little farm stands around the city that are also mapped out. Why don't we have those?
Good, more.
To me, livable cities also include climate responsive design elements. So they have living walls, where buildings are covered either with vegetation, or they have, reflective roofs and materials to reduce heat gain. They have shade corridors that protect inhabitants from extreme temperatures, particularly, the heat right now. They're designed with orientation in mind so that prevailing breezes can kind of flow through spaces again, just to keep people cool. Because as we all know, the heat island effect is really making cities unbearable. So a lot of climate responsive design elements that are not incorporated into the design of cities right now, in order, again, to kind of reflect that heat gain. But that also really ties into, and I love the idea of food production, because I think it's really important that people know that food doesn't come from the grocery store, right? And I really believe that when people are involved in community gardens or growing, even if it's just herbs in pots on windowsills, they get a closer connection to what they're eating. And as we all know, we are what we eat. So I think that's a really important part of this equation.
Absolutely. And then, for people who are, kind of for whom the opposite is true, for people who do grow their own or do farm work, also, I think like more control, better working conditions, right? More worker owned food businesses, more cooperatives, better labor laws. and less exploitation. So I think if people are growing food, they also are then gaining an understanding of what is involved in growing food, which then you can then make the leap to, oh, wait a minute, the people who grow food should be able to do so safely and in healthy conditions. What
For
else?
me, I'd want a walkable city or a walkable neighborhood just because I really miss socializing with people. So I would want a stronger community.
So people can kind of encounter each other in like a low key, incidental, random way.
Yeah, exactly. Like that way it's low pressure, but then you get to interact with more folks throughout your day.
I second Victoria's suggestion, some sort of spatial arrangement that draws people together on a daily basis where you encounter each other and build that sense of community. Thinking of Jane Jacobs' work in Lower Manhattan, that kind how to replicate that, but is so much isolation, even in
Well,
a community, even in a community that has very close townhouses where I am. Everybody stays except the next door neighbor. That's about it. There isn't there. Yeah.
that
Something
isolation
spatial.
is so real, isn't it? And it
It
is
is. It
partly
really
through
is.
design, partly through habit. And so let's dig into that one a little bit just for funsies. What would, or what do, because perhaps you have this, what brings you out of your home into the world to convene with other people? What would you do this for? This thing that we're hearing about, it sounds so nice, right? What would actually, like, what does get you to do it? Or if you don't do it at the moment, what would get you to do it? What would bring you out into the possibility of connecting with other people in this gathering way? I'm seeing, go ahead.
I'm just filling out in the walkable city. It'd be the cleaning at the eco-friendly cleaning store, where to get the bread. There would be this constant kind of interaction. The challenge is how to do that in the suburbs and sort of commute. Yeah, for those who can't simply walk to. Yeah, that's the challenge.
How? Let's ask how. How are we going to do it in the suburbs? We're imagining a kind of residential development situation, right? I've been in those. They are not what I'm used to, but I've been in them. And in one of them that I was in the fall, I was taking a walk, which it certainly was not designed for. And there was a grandma and a granddaughter selling persimmons out of their garage. And I was like, oh, you could just do that. A lot of the structural solutions that people were recommending above, changing zoning, building new big things, we need that. And to get it, we need to come together and lean on the people who make these decisions, right? Sometimes that's city councils or town councils. Sometimes it's planning boards or zoning boards. Sometimes it's the Department of Public Works. Collective pressure on those people is so useful, so important. And also, sometimes you can maybe just do something yourself. Sometimes you really can put out a little food box, right? Actually, Providence has that. I've seen that. I've seen one with books next to one with like canned goods. And it's great. You could just have persimmons out of your garage. I'm also seeing Halloween brings us out. We have a neighborhood group that supports children's here. I love that. So holidays can be a thing that bring people out. Could you start a little holiday? Could you have a little parade for something historical, something social, something for rent control, just for example. Just throwing something out there. Thinking about, so having a little event can kind of bring stuff out, and that can be a great way to get people out into a space. So maybe in our livable town, our livable housing development, maybe you give one person grows fruit tree seedlings, right? And then maybe there's a little fruit tour. I'm making this up. But that would be so cute, right? That would be so nice. The other thing that I think is worth maybe considering is, because of the way that economic segregation and regular old racial segregation tend to work in this country, people often are locked into communities of people who have the same income as them. And that can mean sometimes we've got a lot of resources and we don't totally know what to do with them. And sometimes it means we don't have enough resources and we're having trouble putting the things that we want to see into practice. So that's another thing that I think I would want to see in the livable city is A, rent control, 2, upzoning, as somebody mentioned above, and D, paths that take everybody through everybody else's zone, which means reduced policing, honestly. Thank you so much for being here. Person who just left and can't hear me. Anything else? What else we got 3 more minutes, real quick. What else are we looking at?
I just want to share, I imagine people, everyone involved in the arts, whatever they might select, but have time to harness that, because I believe we are all creative in some way. And also something that I remember from a group that I attended in not too long ago, talking about dreams, and having a dream group in every corner that people could share their dreams. I think that will be a great way of staying connected with the times and climate. You know, I think we need to invite that aspect of life too, like, so that will be exciting.
I love that. There is a writer and psychologist named Martha Crawford. I'll try to find her and put her in the chat, who was gathering people's climate dreams. She was asking people to share those with her online. And absolutely making something together is a wonderful way to, that's also a way to bring people together. It's a way to kind of keep our creativity lively and honed, right? So that we can keep kind of having these kinds of conversations that we're having right now. Imagining things, creating something that makes people feel, that makes people think. Classes starting in elementary school on how to grow and make food. Yeah, education is a huge part of this, right? And I would even add to that, Mary, multi-generational education, right? So having people from all generations join students, young students, in order to do this. Whether that's somebody who has been growing tomatoes in buckets in their backyard for 20 years, or somebody who used to live on and work on a farm ages ago and has moved to the city in their later age. All of these are opportunities for people to learn both about food and each other. I love this. Another thing that I'm thinking about, hold on, thinking about the walkable city. I saw somebody online say, if you can walk around your city, but the person who sells you bread or pours your coffee can't afford to live there too, you live in a theme park. So thinking also about how to create a range of housing options that are available to people of any income. We're just making housing free. This is just something that I think about a lot, how housing should be free. I really, really do. I think it should be free. We can talk about that another time. But it's not something that I have the ability to make happen at the moment, but it really is just something that I think. So how are people feeling now? If you're willing to say, and again, because it's your feeling and you don't know it, and you don't know us, you don't have to say, but just check in with how you're feeling now as we've been having this conversation. What's your body doing? What's your heart doing? And is there a shift from where you were at before? Anything change, or are you kind of where you were at before?
For me, I just want to share, I feel exposed just speaking, but this opens, it's like an opening for me. It's like, I want to continue doing this more. It's like getting hungry from, like realizing I'm hungry of this type of connection or conversation, but it's hard to get out there and expose yourself. But I want to do it more. This feeling.
I'm so grateful to you for saying that, and also for doing it, for actually taking that step to put yourself out. It is, you know, this is, when we're talking about feelings, we're talking about stuff that we're often taught to not share. When we're talking about what we want, we're often talking about stuff that people have told us is not possible or that we should not try for. And so seeing what Kim's saying, making space to dream and act, that is so huge. I'm so glad you said that. And I want you to think a little bit, what are the places where you're already having some of these conversations in your life, in your workplace, among the people that you know? Again, I was saying before, like, oh, like, you know, we can sometimes like curb ourselves and not reveal ourselves because we're afraid of how the people in our community are going to respond. We're afraid they're going to think it's stupid. We're afraid they're going to think it's crazy. We're afraid they're going to think we're crazy or babies or unrealistic or too blah, 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 fill in the negative word there. And sometimes they will, but sometimes they surprise us. And so how might you open yourself up to that surprise, that possibility with the people that you live with, work with, stand in line at the post office with? That's one thing that I would encourage you to imagine. And again, you can say that out loud if you wish, but you don't have to. But think about it. Where are the spaces to dream and act on these ideas? And another thing that you can think about, and then that my book also outlines some possibilities for working on, but I'll just mention it here, is how might you increase the time and energy and power of people to act on these ideas? One way, I'm seeing Mary put this in the chat, religious organizations, absolutely. If you are a member of a faith community, and you don't know for a fact that they'd be hostile to this, also, you don't have to put it in terms of climate change, just like putting that out there. You could just say like, hey, I think this is going to increase like community cohesion. I think it's going to increase people's well-being overall. Like I said, anything that helps people live well, weather climate change, but also weather injustice, you're doing your community a favor by getting that started. You don't even have to put it in terms of climate impact. You can just know that. Another thing I'm thinking of, oh, Dara, you just checked in with people at the post office. That's beautiful. I love that for you. Those little everyday caring moments are so huge, and it can make the difference between like a day when you feel like you're gonna have to lie down in the road and a day when you feel like you might be able to keep going.
It was amazing. Literally everyone in the post office was having this big conversation about this man who was having housing struggles, but then like overcame them, and everyone was congratulating him, and we were all just talking about hope. It was like the most amazing experience. It's like, what's going on? This is the best post office ever.
So beautiful. And like, this is what can happen, I think, when you do what Fernando was talking about and like open up the possibility a little bit. And sometimes you get shot down. And that also is something that we can learn to weather, because when that happens, you learn that it isn't going to kill you. You are not going to wither into dust and blow away if you open up and somebody is not receptive. You are going to survive that. You have already, I know, because all of you are grown people, I know that you've already survived humiliations. I know that you've already survived things not working out. You know how to do that. Opening that box a little bit about something that you care about to see if somebody else cares about it too. Worst case, you get a little more practice in doing it, even if they're not receptive. Best case, it becomes this incredible gift that you can share together. Last thing I think I'll say in terms of like what we might take from this conversation and how we might kind of like capacitate and strengthen one another to meet this crisis, is you can also think about how do do I say this? Sometimes I call it back of house work, which is like a shorthand that I've developed and is actually not very helpful. But like the example that I'll give is, let's say that there is a public hearing for changing zoning in the town where you live. There's some sort of public hearing. The planning board has said, okay, you can come and talk for 3 minutes before we take your microphone away. And it is, it's on a Tuesday night. And you're like, man, I hate public speaking. I cannot stand it. If I go up there, I'm gonna throw up. And so maybe you say to your friend who you've been having these little climate conversations with, hey, listen, there's this public hearing on Tuesday night. I don't think I can stand to be there. Here's what I would say if I could go. Can you go? Do you want to drop the kids off? And I'll put on a movie. I'll get pizza. You go talk at the meeting. Bring the kids over in their pajamas. Something like that is an example of kind of finding out like how the different capacities that we have within ourselves and between our neighbors and in our friendships and relationships can then help us to create the kind of power that can shape what a town does, what a planning department does, what a city council does. It doesn't have to all be, I know a lot of people are like, well, if I can't march in the street, what can I do? Or if nobody cares when I march in the street, what can I do? And the answer is you can do a lot, but you got to expand your vision of what's possible. Can you give someone a ride? Can you pick up someone's prescription? Can you maybe do a little bit of research on zoning laws? If you're the kind of person who's very good at like sinking into an internet rabbit hole and like picking up like, oh yeah, like here's the finer points. Here's the little like gotchas and here's the little possibilities, and write that up into a beautiful little document that people can then use for testimony. Can you get people together to write postcards to voters who, for some reason, are undecided? My mom's doing that, I think, this week. She signed up with an organization that does it, and I think she's also getting together with a couple of friends to do it, which is cute to me. So thinking about how, go ahead, Billy, go ahead.
Oh, I'm actually in town government where I live, and fortunately there's hybrid options too. So if you're shy to speak in person, usually you can be online and you don't even have to turn it on your camera if you don't want to. And also just emailing those boards, the planning commissions, boards of zoning boards, trustee, boards of trustees, city councils, county commissioners. And we live in a small town with a pretty good local paper too, so letters to the editor are welcome, and some people write some pretty thought-provoking stuff. So those are just other ways to speak out. And I think like when your original question, maybe just taking this a little tangent, but the original question talked about a place that's livable, and I don't remember all the words, but I live at over 8,000 feet in Colorado in a mountain town, and I think a big stressor is wildfire, and to a degree, I think things can be done to mitigate and reduce our vulnerability, and hopefully harden homes and clear out vegetation around homes. And to a degree, also, they've been burning there for thousands of years, so it's like even if things were to get better, wildfire still remains an issue. I mean, trees have evolved out there because of wildfire, and so just kind of embracing a relationship with it at the same time. I mean, knowing right now it's gotten worse for sure, and potentially will just get worse, but also embracing a relationship with it, so there's less anxiety around it and more action about like, what can we do? Hardening homes is really expensive, and we're challenged in our community and in my household, for that matter, with being able to do what we need to do with the old mining cabins we bought and live in now, and that are all built of very flammable wood. And so there are some things we can do and some things that remain a challenge. So.
Thank you, Billy. And I think there is a longer conversation to be had about when is it time to also let go of the place where you live. That's something that people in Rhode Island are definitely contending with now. And it is very heavy and it's hard to even think about. It's hard to even talk about for a lot of people. But
that's true. But I think there's also, I mean, yeah, and I don't want to diminish that. I mean, some places will be underwater on the coastline or whatever, unlivable. But there's also places, there's also there's also not letting go of the place, but just more of a embracing the realities of living in a place. I mean, up 8,000 feet above Colorado is not going to go underwater, so it's still there. Will it burn? Probably, but it will also grow back. So
I see Sarah with a hand up. Go for it, Sarah.
Yeah, this is such an important and timely part of this discussion. And it's something that I know I think about a lot and our team talks about a lot. And, professionals in the green building space, and Billy, I know you're engaged in these conversations too, as I know you to be a green building professional. I feel like this conversation of, do we rebuild after disaster, or do we abandon places that we love, our homes and our neighborhoods and our communities, because they are, becoming climate change. I'm going to use the word deserts, but they really can't be salvaged. And I think there's a lot of coastal communities that are struggling with that, Kate, as you said. And I think those are the ones right now that probably have the biggest risk of permanent climate change, because Billy, as you said, and I live at 9,000 feet in the Colorado Rockies and southwestern Colorado near Telluride. And we will, wildfire is the thing, right? It's not if, it's when. Unfortunately. And so every time we have a wet winter and a wet spring, we're so happy because it mitigates wildfire. But, I see these people on the news talking about how they're going to rebuild after a superstorm or a tornado. And I love their perseverance and I love their passion. But, how much heartbreak do communities really, how much can they take, right? I see, for example, we'll go back to the rising sea levels, because that's a permanent thing, right? Miami, gone. A lot of coastal cities across the globe, just gone, right? They're going to be gone soon. A lot of coastal communities, it's yes, there's an argument to build with structural insulated panels and to raise buildings, X amount of feet up off the landscape in order to manage floodwater better. But at the end of the day, it's such a hard decision about, do you do what the government's doing in New Jersey, where they're purchasing coastal property from homeowners because they want to retire that property, basically, rather than having those communities have to go through these superstorms and these tidal surges where their homes get ruined, 1, 2, 3, 5 times. How many times do you have to, can you hear communities say, okay, we're rebuilding for the 4th time after major flooding or a hurricane? How many times can a heart bear that kind of loss and disaster? And so I think we're getting to a place that is going to be, I think where communities are going to deal with the hardest decisions they're ever going to have to make about leaving the places where, maybe their families have been for generations, but it is just not realistic to live in those areas anymore. And so I think that whether we're building professionals or whether we're mental health professionals, those are the types of just heartbreaking conversations we need to prepare ourselves for.
Because we went to that place, which is a real place that we need to be prepared to go, even if it's not us, what Sarah's describing could be true for somebody on this call. What Sarah described could be like your town, your house, your street. And if it's not yours, it's somebody's. So being able to undergo that sadness and still survive is also something that we can practice. We don't want to have to practice it. It sucks, but it's something that we can practice being in together. And I'm going to ask us before we part to do a quick little exercise, also from the book, that I also use a lot with the group that I work with, which is facing sea level rise, and what Sarah's describing, which is called managed retreat. I'm going to ask you to think about that climate impact that you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation. Think about that thing, how you feel about it. Also, just notice the places where your body is touching something. So your chair, your couch, your bed, the floor. Notice those places. Feel yourself in space. And whatever you feel in response to that climate impact, you can close or unfocus your eyes if you want, but you don't have to. Whatever you feel in response to that climate impact, I want you to let that feeling rise up and then subside, like the sound of a car passing you on the road. That sadness, that anger, that grief, that frustration, that dismay, or even that hopefulness, that's okay too. It doesn't have to be a negative one. Let it rise up and let it pass. Let me try it one more time. Let it rise up and let it pass. And one thing I like about this exercise is, again, it doesn't ask you to try to change the feeling. It doesn't try to get you to make it go away. It makes room for it in your life. It acknowledges that our emotions are things that happen and then also stop happening, don't always happen in the same way. You can do it wherever and whenever you are. You can do it and nobody can tell you're doing it. So you could do it in a meeting. I do it in meetings a lot. It is something that can be yours and you can do it all the time. It's also something that is relatively easy to share with other people. So I often open meetings with that exercise or close them like we're doing with this one because it is quick, it is easy, it is not tough to explain, and it is not tough to do. And it is a reminder that what we feel is ours and we get to decide how we want to act on it. So with our last few minutes, if folks have questions, I would love to hear them, or points they want to raise. Love to hear those as well.
Kate, I don't have a question, but I just want to say thank you so much. I've got to run into another meeting, but this has been uplifting and supportive and fun. And so I thank you. Thanks everybody for showing up and being here and offering your thoughts and insights. And I'm going to hop off, but Kate and Victoria, please stay on if there are questions. But again, Kate, just really appreciate you and your work, and thanks to everybody. And I see a question on there. We will make the recording available, and check in with us. We'll hopefully be doing more work with Kate and with any of you who are interested in continuing to talk about this topic, because it's really important to us, and we know it's also important to Green Builder Media's audience.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm so grateful for the chance to be with you.
Thank you.
Other questions that folks find themselves with? I'm glad that they're useful. Thank you so much. Thanks for trying them.
I'm interested in applying them with students in class, because
They work really well in class. I have a teaching background also, and they work great. Anything that didn't get addressed, but that's on people's minds? No, huh? Nothing?
Just want to say thank you. I like this. I'm thinking of this imaginal space where we can dream together. I would love to practice this more, or find a way, I'm a psychotherapist, that I can do that in any way, because I think it's very important. Yeah. Thank you, Kate.
Yeah. I'm putting my contacts and email contact info in the chat if anybody wants to get in touch to think or talk about working together. I will also just say that I'm creating a couple of workshops that anybody can do for free if they want to do them themselves, that are kind of in addition to what's in the book, which you can also do. You can do whatever in the book. Once you buy the book, it's yours, whatever. But also I can come and help you facilitate them if you want. And that facilitation will be free for a group that's majority people of color, and a small fee for anybody else. And that's for me to do it, but if you want to do it yourself, just do it. So please get in touch about that. Any other last minute questions, thoughts, things you want to leave other people with also? It doesn't have to be a question for me. I'm mainly seeing quietness, so I'm going to thank you all once more. Hope you'll stay in touch. Maybe we can do something through Green Builder Media together. And I wish you strength and luck and courage in all of your next things. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate. This was great.